The figures are astonishing. This country is embarking on a journey into indebtedness, the like of which has never been seen before. If the Chancellor of the Exchequer's forecasts are right, unlike some previous sets of forecasts, we shall come out of recession next summer, but won't have a balanced budget until 2015 to 16, and not just after the next election, but after the one after that. It's a huge gamble. But one the gamblers on the market seem to like. The FT index of 100 leading shares bounced up nearly 10%, the biggest gain in its history. The Chancellor plans to borrow the highest amount of money since modern records began, £118 billion by 2010, more than 3 times the government estimated. Alistair Darling said he would do whatever it takes to support people through difficult times, so he's injected £20 billion into the economy to try to keep it afloat. He's cutting VAT next week to 15%, hoping to get people spending again. But there is a sting. It'll mean significant tax rises after the next election. There'll be a rise in our national insurance contributions by 0.5%, and those likely to feel increases most are high earners. Anyone with an income of over $150,000 will see their tax rate rise to 45%, or an extra £3,000 a year. So this was a momentous announcement, even if it doesn't necessarily meet the needs of the moment. The Chancellor of the Exchequer's performance in the House of Commons today wasn't exactly up there with the greatest feats of parliamentary oratory, but it abandoned all sorts of principles which have been absolutely central to the New Labour project. Our political editor, Michael Crick, watched it all.
In effect, what we got today was an emergency budget designed to put more cash into people's pockets, to speed up spending in the shops, to help business, and to limit the length and depth of the recession. Today was a big gamble financially, and also in terms of politics. For both the government and the opposition, the ramifications are huge. This morning, Cabinet Ministers got the details first, including Mr Darling's forecast that the recession will go on until the middle of next year, 4 successive quarters of negative growth. That means a huge turnaround in the healthy growth forecast for 2009 that Mr Darling was predicting in his March budget less than 9 months ago. But what shocked MPs were his borrowing forecasts. 78 billion this financial year, double his March figure, and 118 billion next year, in part because of today's tax cuts, such as the temporary 2.5% cut in VAT.
I therefore propose to cut VAT from 17.5% to 15% until the end of next year. Mr. Speaker, this reduction will come into effect next Monday, December the 1st. It will continue for 13 months before returning to the present level of 17.5% at the beginning of 2010, by which time we expect the recovery to be underway.
The Chancellor's £20 billion stimulus package is equal to about 1% of national output. Along with the temporary cut in VAT, Mr Darling will inject £3 billion by rushing forward capital spending on housing, schools and roads. The extra £120 rise in tax allowances which Mr Darling announced last spring to quell the 10p tax revolt will go up to £145 in April, the only one of his tax cuts that's not temporary. Other measures include delaying for a year the 1% rise in corporation tax for small firms, and he's brought forward to January rises in child benefit and state pensions. But the economy would not be fully back on track for another 7 years, he admitted.
And by 2015-16, we will again be borrowing only to invest.
This means that the projection. Until then, one of Gordon Brown's golden rules is suspended. To answer opposition charges that his borrowing is unfunded, Mr Darling plans big tax rises in future. A new tax rate of 45% on people earning more than £150,000 a year, and personal tax allowances will be reduced or axed for those on more than £100,000. National insurance rates for workers and employers will both go up by 0.5%. And crucially, most of these measures aren't scheduled until 2011, after the next election. In contrast to a very low-key Chancellor, his shadow went on the rampage.
Massive borrowing, rising unemployment, tax giveaways for Christmas paid by tax rises for life. Giving with one hand, taking with another, everything we have come to expect from this Prime Minister. He says the recession will end halfway through 2009, but the tax rises won't come in until 2011. I wonder why he chose those dates. This budget is all about the political cycle and not the economic cycle.
And what they're proposing is a higher rate of tax on the very high earners after 2 years, possibly. What surely is needed is a comprehensive approach which cuts income tax on low-paid, middle-income families, removing the vast plethora of tax reliefs and allowances which the wealthy benefit from. Not this very limited fig leaf for redistributive policy.
On direct public investment, although he's borrowing $300 billion over the next 3 years, he's only bringing forward $3 billion from the existing 2010-11 budget in terms of direct public investment. This isn't new money, it's simply being brought forward.
There's a great sense of anxiety amongst the Labour MPs to whom I've spoken tonight. Many think that Alistair Darling's package today was simply too complicated politically to understand, and in terms of the economics of it, they fear that the cut in VAT over the next 13 months may not have the impact that Mr Darling hopes and expects. Labour members are worried too that Treasury finances aren't scheduled to get back to normal until 2015, beyond not just the next election, but the one after that. And even that probably depends on the British economy turning round by the middle of next year.
In the end, of course, what matters in government in circumstances like this is what